first level, the death of the US ambassador to Libya is a great personal loss to the State Department. He was a very experienced Arabist and a person who took part in the handling of Libya throughout the war of last year and the reconstruction phase thereafter. The political ramifications of what has happened in Benghazi are quite significant. There are at least three lessons for the United States from that. The first one is that clearly there are substantial political elements in Egypt and in Libya willing and able to pounce on any excuse, any justification to advance essentially an anti-American agenda. The second problem is that President Obama's attempt to create a new discourse with the Islamic world has clearly not worked. The assassination of the ambassador may be an isolated case, but all opinion polls indicate that there is a substantial level of mistrust of the United States throughout the region, and American support for democratic changes in Libya and in Egypt don't seem to have been remembered as particularly significant. But thirdly is the political implication in the United States itself in a year of an election. Clearly, Mr. Romney, the opponent, has already called upon the president to show much more muscle in defending American interests in the embassy in Cairo that has come under attack and in the military and diplomatic facilities in Libya. But this whole episode comes at a time when the relations between Israel and the United States over potential military operations against Iran are also at a difficult moment. So the problem for the administration is that although the case may be isolated, although it cannot be pinned the responsibility either to the Libyan government or to the Egyptian government, the result is still of an administration that appears to be floundering in the Middle East rather than guiding events in the region. Well, the American televised presidential debate devoted exclusively to foreign policy, it's towards the end of October, so one has to remember that there is about a month and a bit before the debate, so it's quite possible that some of these events will not feature so prominently. But clearly the Middle East is becoming one of President Obama's biggest headaches in the election year, and he was hoping to park the Middle East to one side, partly because there are no simple answers in the region, partly because there was the assumption that the American electorate is not interested in a new military entanglement in the area. There was a feeling, therefore, that the Middle East issue and the debate as a whole could be avoided, and perhaps the president could be able to point out to some successes, like promoting democracy in a number of Arab states and supporting democratic change, and the apprehension and killing of Osama bin Laden. It now looks as though it may be impossible to avoid a much bigger debate of options, and this time the president is at a disadvantage. He was at the helm for 4 years. He's got very little to show for it. There are very few connections between the situation in Libya and the situation in Syria, apart from the rekindling of a rather older debate, whether promoting change, supporting change, even if the change is violent, as has been the case in Libya and it is the case in Syria, whether that change would lead actually to a stable government and a government that is predictable and applies international norms. There's no indication that anyone in the government structure in Libya tolerated this crime perpetrated against American diplomats, but clearly the government was unable to prevent it, was weak enough not to be able to ensure the very basic obligation, which is the respect for international diplomats accredited in the country. So it would raise some questions about the solidity of the regimes after revolutions in the Middle East, but also about their inclination. There was the assumption that if we support democratic change, we will have governments which will no longer be beholden to an old traditional anti-American agenda. But it looks as though the reality is much more complicated, and changing public perceptions is a much more difficult affair.